So over the past several years, I've had numerous occasions to speak with young adults who are thinking about what they're going to do when they're done with their schooling. You know, a lot of people these days are finishing up as early as they can. You've got people who want to try to graduate from high school a year or a semester early. And then when they're looking at college, you get it done in 3 years. You know, and so I understand that some people just don't like school. That's okay. And I know there are financial issues involved with trying to get done so you don't have to keep racking up college payments or loans. But whenever somebody just wants to be done with it all, just want to be done with school, I always have to have a reality check kind of conversation with them and say, what do you think is waiting for you on the other side? When you're done with school, what are you expecting? Because once you take that last test and you get whatever diploma you're going to get, there is nothing but decade after decade of adulting waiting for you. Working, paying bills, dealing with hard decisions. There's no more 2 to 3 month summer vacations. There's no more extended multiple week Christmas break. Whatever tests you might have to study for in high school and college, the tests you'll face in adulthood are 1,000 times harder, and you will feel so much less prepared. There's the test of, can you get a job? You have to have a job. I hope you know that much at least. There's a test of, can you show up for work on time every day, year after year? Can you spend less money than you earn week after week, month after month, year after year? Can you take responsibility for things? Can you manage a household? Can you handle multiple payments to multiple things and keep making those? The tests keep coming hard and fast, increasing in difficulty until you stumble into the tomb. And then you're done. In our Christian life, we will face one test after another as well. In fact, having our faith tested, neither failing the test or passing the test, that's the only way to grow up and mature in our relationship with God and in our character. In James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, the little brother of Jesus put it this way: when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. In our journey with Abraham, we have already seen him tested and stretched in multiple ways, multiple times. And we would think that after Isaac was born, that old Abraham could just sit back and enjoy the fruits of his 25-year journey with the Lord. But God still has one more test, and it's the greatest test of all. Chapter 22, verse 1. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I will tell you. Now, if you've never heard this story before, you probably hear those lines and think, whoa, what the heck is happening here? How could God ask Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac? Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. He had to wait 25 years to get Isaac. All of God's promises to Abraham for multiple descendants and for a line of kings, that was all going to come through Isaac. God had made that abundantly clear. So what on earth is happening here? This is a big ask from God. And God knows exactly what he's asking. He says, take your son, your only son, Isaac, that son whom you love. Isaac was the only son Abraham had left after he had divorced Hagar and sent Ishmael away. It's thought that at this point, Isaac is a robust teenager. And we'll see some things that indicate that later in the text. Abraham is probably between 115 and 120 years old at this time. Isaac is his everything. Isaac is his only child. Isaac is his heir. Isaac is his hope. Isaac is his greatest joy. Isaac is his greatest treasure. And Abraham knew what a burnt offering was and what it entailed to offer a burnt offering. I read an explanation this week in a commentary by Kent Hughes, a Bible scholar. He said, to an ancient Middle Easterner, burnt offering suggested a process. First, cutting the offering's throat, then dismemberment, and then a sacrifice by fire in which the body parts were consumed on the altar. This is the horror that Abraham imagined with his own son as the sacrifice. So the common understanding here is that God is testing Abraham to see if he will give back to God that thing that he treasures most in the world. He's testing Abraham to see if Abraham loves that thing more than he loves God himself. What would that thing be for you that you treasure more than anything else in the world? Maybe a child, maybe a relationship with someone you love, maybe a career that you've worked so hard to build, maybe some possession that you treasure above all else. As amazing as God's request is, equally amazing is Abraham's obedience to it. Verse 3, so Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. Now the phrase here, he rose early in the morning, we came across that phrase back in chapter 21, verse 14, where it says Abraham rose early in the morning and he sent Hagar and Ishmael away. It appears that when Abraham has a very unpleasant task that he doesn't want to discuss with anyone else, that he gets up very early in the morning to avoid extra conversations. Possibly he's doing this to avoid a conversation with Sarah, who would never sign off on this. He gets up, he saddles his donkey, he cuts some wood for the offering. He grabs Isaac, 2 servants, and hits the road and starts what would have been a journey between 45 and 50 miles. Verse 4, on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. So what is this place that Abraham sees from afar? It is thought that this was Mount Moriah, which would later become the site of the temple that Solomon would build, where all of the thousands of burnt offerings would be offered in worship to God year after year. We know this from 2 Chronicles 3, verse 1, which says, Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah. So that's where Abraham is going to make this sacrifice years before Jerusalem ever existed, before there was ever a temple. Abraham sees this mountain. He tells his servants to wait at the foot of the mountain with the donkey. And he says that he and Isaac are going to go up and then they're going to come back again. So what's going on here when he says that they're both going to come back again? Well, it's obvious that Abraham has not shared with his traveling companions what he has been told to do. He could be trying to avoid getting in a conversation with them about it. They may think, listen, he's old, he's senile, he says he's going to kill his heir. We can't let this happen. I mean, he's having dementia. We cannot let him take that boy up the altar. So he didn't tell them. Or it could be that he really believed that Isaac was going to come back with him. The writer of Hebrews would say this in chapter 11. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead. So the writer of Hebrews suggests that Abraham never stopped believing that Isaac would be the heir, even when he was called to sacrifice him. He didn't know what God had in mind, but he knew that this God who had empowered his 90-year-old woman to become pregnant after she was way too old and postmenopausal to have a baby, that if this God wanted to raise his son from the ashes, that he could do that. Verse 6, and Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac, his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went, both of them together. And Isaac said to his father, Abraham, my father. And Abraham said, here I am, my son. He said, well, behold, here's the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went, both of them together. So Abraham makes Isaac carry the wood for the offering up the mountain. This demonstrates that Isaac is strong, that he could probably overpower Abraham if he wanted to, or at least escape. Again, we see Isaac has no idea what's supposed to happen. He says, Dad, we've got fire and wood. What are we going to sacrifice? Think of the burden that Abraham would alone have to carry on this 3-day journey. Traveling with his beloved son, picturing himself butchering his son, having no idea, his son having no idea what awaits him. Psychologically, can you even imagine? I mean, what would have been going on? Abraham must have been questioning his own brain, his conception of reality, everything. But he keeps moving forward. And when Abraham says God will provide for himself the offering, is he just avoid telling Isaac the truth so that Isaac doesn't try to get out of it? Or does he have faith that God is somehow going to intervene at the last minute? The text doesn't say. It just leaves it up for our interpretation. Verse 9, when they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. So at some point here, Isaac is clued into what's going on. Kent Hughes writes, one thing is very clear. Abraham could not have offered Isaac without Isaac's consent and cooperation. Isaac, as the bearer of the wood, was the stronger of the two. As a young man, he was also the quicker and faster of the two. Apparently, Isaac had decided to obey his father whatever the cost, just as his father had decided to obey God whatever the cost. Perhaps Abraham persuaded Isaac by rehearsing the story of his son's supernatural birth, and then by enumerating the reaffirmations of the great promises to him, and therefore reasoning that God could have restored Isaac to life, even though his body would be reduced to ashes. Whatever conversations they may have had, this didn't stop things from moving forward. Verse 10, then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. Now, this is one of the most dramatic moments in the whole Bible. And this is something that artists have made engravings of and paintings of for centuries. One of my favorites is this one that my favorite artist, ChatGPT, created online in my office this week. Check out this moment. Abraham has the knife in hand. Isaac is bound. He's on the wood that will be set on fire to reduce him to ashes, to incinerate him. What's going to happen? So much suspense. Would all of God's promises to Abraham come crashing down? in a moment of divine cruelty. Maybe this was what this God is like. Maybe he's not good after all. But the very last second before the knife moves across Isaac's throat, a voice comes from heaven. Verse 11, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. He said, here I am. He said, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For I now know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. So here again we encounter this character, the angel of the Lord, or the angel of Yahweh. Remember, when this character appears, this is considered a manifestation of God himself in visible form. Because notice how when the angel speaks, he says, me. You haven't withheld him from me. So this is God interjecting. He says Abraham's name urgently 2 times, Abraham, Abraham. And he calls off the slaughter at the last second. Abraham and Isaac have submitted to God's instructions all the way through to the finish line. God announces that Abraham has passed the test, the final, the ultimate test of faith and obedience. He was willing to sacrifice that which he loved more than anything else to the God that he loved even more. It has to be one of the greatest moments of relief in the history of the human race. We've all had close calls where it seemed like things were going to turn out very badly, and then they turned out okay after all. But none of us has been asked to sacrifice our only son and set them on fire. How would they react? What did they do the moment that Abraham put the knife down? Did they jump up and down? Did they hug? Did Isaac step away and said, I need some space, Dad? That was intense. You just need to not talk for a while. James, the little brother of Jesus, would use this passage as an example of how our saving faith in Christ will always involve active obedience. He wrote in James 2, don't you remember that our ancestor Abraham was shown to be right with God by his actions when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see, his faith and actions worked together. His actions made his faith complete. And so it happened just as the scriptures say. Abraham believed God, and God counted him as righteous because of his faith. He was even called the friend of God. So Abraham is held up in the Bible as the example of how any human being is only ever made right with God through their faith in God, not their works. But he's also an example that illustrates if we have that saving faith in God, which makes us right with God, it will always result in obedience to God. And if we say we have faith, but don't live a life of obedience to God, we probably don't have saving faith after all. Back to Genesis 22, verse 13. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. So it turns out that Abraham understood the character of God correctly after all. He had told Isaac back in verse 8, God will himself provide the lamb for the burnt offering, and he was right. It turns out that it wasn't a lamb, it was a full-grown ram, and it had gotten stuck in this thicket, in this bush. It couldn't escape. Abraham quickly goes over and grabs it and sacrifices it. God did provide the offering for the sacrifice. This had been his plan all along, and Abraham called the place, the Lord will provide. Literally, the Lord will see to it. In the Hebrew, the phrase here is Yahweh Jireh or Jehovah Jireh. That's one of my favorite names for God, Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will provide. We used to sing this song called Jehovah Jireh. Anybody ever remember that old praise song? It's in E minor. It kind of bounces, and I tried to sing it this week to see if I could sing it for you, and I couldn't nail it. So it's just this great song. You should look it up on YouTube. I love this song. I love this name for God. Jehovah Jireh, our provider. Then the angel speaks again. Verse 15. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed because you have obeyed my voice. So here we see God strengthening and reiterating all of his former promises to Abraham and adding one new promise. He had already promised descendants as numerous as the sand on the seashore and as the stars in the sky, and that all the families of the earth would be blessed and all this stuff. But he has this new thing. He says, you shall possess the gates of your enemies. This is new. Now, the gates of your enemies, this was talking about total domination of your enemies. The gates of a city, that was the place where the elders of the city would meet to make judgments and make decisions. The gates were where the military would be deployed out of and where they would return after battle. So if you possess the gates, you have complete control of your enemies. And he says that this is going to be part of your blessing now. And we see that all these promises are tied back to Abraham's obedience in this situation. He says, because you have done this, because you have obeyed, I will surely bless you. This is important. In the scriptures, the best blessings, the greatest blessings always come on the other side of obedience. So if there's an area of your life where you're living in disobedience, you know God has called you to reorient your life in this way or to do something, whatever it may be, and you're holding back, know that you are forfeiting the blessings that will come from obedience. Trust and obey. That's the only way to be happy in Jesus, to trust and obey. And although the angel of the Lord seems very excited to roll all this stuff out to Abraham, hey, it's going to be great. You're going to get this, and this. It almost appears that Abraham is just exhausted. I may be reading into this, but that's just how I picture it. Verse 19, Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose, and they went together to Beersheba, and he sat on the couch and watched TV for 2 months. I mean, I just see it going that way. That's how it feels like it would be. Like, Lord, I'm just going to check out and zone out and see my pastor, talk through some of this stuff because I'm a little bit traumatized about what we just went through together. So what is this passage about? Why did God put him through this? Why did God ask him to do this? This is one of the most powerful and the most challenging passages in the entire Bible. And theologians have pondered this. They have written about this for centuries. Let me share 3 reasons this happened. First, this happened because God wanted to show that he expects our loyalty. When Abraham left his family and his household and his homeland and all the foreign gods that he had grown up worshiping, he did it because he was changing his allegiance to this new God that had spoken to him and promised him all these great things. He had switched over loyalty to this one true God. So now some 40 years later or more, Abraham has been following this God, but now God has brought these new blessings into his life. He's kept every promise to Abraham in ways beyond what Abraham could dream. He has all this wealth. He has all this influence. He has a son, an heir that he never dreamed he would have. And so now, where is his loyalty? Is it to God or is it to the blessings that God has given him? I'm sure Abraham loved Isaac more than life itself. But God had to see if he loved Isaac more than God himself. Abraham passed the test. What about you? Do you love God more than the blessings God has given you? Are you more loyal to God than you are to the blessings he's entrusted to you? Often when we start following God, we do so with great fervor. For me, it was very young in my adulthood. I had nothing, but then I had God. And God was everything. I was born again. I was made new. And it seemed like God would always be enough. But then as you start to walk with God and you start to pray, God begins answering your prayers. You prayed for that job and you got it. And it turned into a career. You prayed for a spouse and you got one. And you loved them more than you ever thought you could love anyone. Maybe you prayed for children and they came. But if we aren't careful, those blessings that God gives us can become a bigger priority in our life than God himself. And God won't have it. That's why Jesus said in Matthew 10:37, who loves father, mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. It should be stated that God in his infinite knowledge knew ahead of time that Abraham would pass this test. But he wanted to show for all time the kind of loyalty that he expects from us. And he wanted to give us an example of someone who did have a greater loyalty to him than even the greatest blessing he ever received. Second, God did this to demonstrate that he is not like other gods. You know, God was going to have Abram's descendants take over the land of Canaan. And that would happen when the Israelites came out of Egypt, 2 million strong, and Joshua would lead them in to this very land, and they would drive out and destroy the people living there. They would possess the gates of their enemies. But one of the reasons for God doing that was because of the horrific things that those nations were doing. It says in Deuteronomy 18, we would have just read this or in our Bible reading. Actually, we're not there yet, unless you read ahead. Some of you have read ahead. I don't know how you're doing that. He says, when you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, be very careful not to imitate the detestable customs of the nations living there. For example, never sacrifice your son or daughter as a burnt offering. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. It's because the other nations have done these detestable things that the Lord your God will drive them out ahead of you. You know, perhaps one of the reasons that Abraham didn't argue with God when God told him to do this is because this was a common practice in the land. Human sacrifice was a way that the gods of that time were worshiped. And up to this point, God hadn't done anything to say, I find that detestable. He was still introducing himself to the pagan world. And so here, God makes it clear that he is in no way like these pagan gods that the other people worshiped. This was the first time he distinguishes himself as a God who finds human sacrifice detestable. Our God is a holy and loving God who values human life, who saves human life, who never demands human life. And many of the false gods of our culture, such as money, achievement, our careers, will ask us to sacrifice our families in order to have them. God will never tell you to sacrifice your family in worship to him. He demands your full loyalty, but from your love for God, you will then love your family above the false gods of money, achievement, career, or your precious hobbies. Would those closest to you, your children, your friends, your spouse, would they say that you love God above your hobbies, your career? And would they say that they love would they say that you love them more than those things? God demands our complete loyalty. And then from that loyalty, he commands that we love and never sacrifice those that he has entrusted to our care. He is not like the gods of that time, and he is nothing like the false gods that people of our day worship. A final reason that God had Abraham go through this process was to point ahead to the sacrifice of his son. And this is where the story really comes into focus, especially as we head into Holy Week and Good Friday. And this is why we're looking at it today, because this isn't just about Abraham and Isaac. This is about what God would one day do through his only son, Jesus Christ. Think of the parallels. Abraham was asked to sacrifice his only son, whom he loved. What did God the Father thunder down upon the Mount of Transfiguration when Jesus was meeting up there and Peter and James and John were there? He said, "This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him." What does it say in John 3:16? "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever believes in him would not perish, but have everlasting life." What God asked Abraham to do, God himself would do. Isaac had to willingly commit to carrying the wood up the mountain for his sacrifice. Jesus would have to carry the wood of his cross to Golgotha for his crucifixion. Isaac submitted to the sacrifice. And Jesus said in John 10:18, "No one takes my life from me. I lay it down of my own accord." But there's more. Isaac was spared because God provided a ram in the thicket to die in his place. In the same way, we are spared from the punishment for our sins, from the death that we deserve, because God provided a substitute for us. This is why when Jesus emerged on the scene, John the Baptist would point him out in John 1:29. It says that he said, "Behold, everybody, there's the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. There is the ram in the thicket so that you don't have to die, so that we don't have to die. That's the one that Jehovah Jireh has brought in at the last moment so that you may live." And by letting us process the unimaginable agony that Abraham and Isaac went through in this episode, helps us understand the agony that God the Father and God the Son went through because of their love for us. In the Garden of Gethsemane, as Jesus was preparing to be bound, to be offered in our place, he was praying, he was talking to his Father. And it says that he was in such anxiety that his sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground. And he pleaded, he said to the Father, "Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Is there any other way that we can save this people without me being the lamb, the sacrifice?" And then he surrendered, and they took him away, and they crucified him. He did it out of love. It says in Romans 5:8, God shows his love for us. And while we are still sinners, Christ died for us. What we can't imagine Abraham would go through, God the Father went through. We can't imagine Isaac's trusting submission. Jesus went through that. So as you enter this Holy Week, ponder the love of Christ for you. Our God asks your complete loyalty above anything else. He wants you to love the giver more than the gifts that he's given you. He wants you to love him more than the blessings he's entrusted to you. But from that love for him, he will call you to love your families above all the false gods of this culture. And Christ presented himself as the ram in the thicket to die the death that you deserve, so that you can live forever with him and with your loved ones who believe in him as well. Ponder those things this week. The sacrifice of God the Father and God the Son to bring you to God. Let us pray.